Live 2020 election coverage from NPR News and Sahan Journal. I'm Nina Moini. I'm a reporter here at NPR News.
And I'm Ibrahim Hirsi, a reporter at Sahan Journal.
Ibrahim, I'm so grateful to be collaborating with you tonight in our two newsrooms. And we want everyone to just know we're so grateful for you spending time with us tonight. It's hard to believe it's already 8 p.m. The polls have closed, although some folks are still in line if they got there before 8, and they can and they should still vote. But we want to make sure tonight that you all know that we want to give you the most up-to-date, time-sensitive coverage. So we are going to be joining in here and there with NPR News, with Tom Cran and Mike Mulcahy, who are holding down the fort there. But just in light of this being such a really historic, remarkable year, really a tragic year in a lot of ways for our state, with the pandemic, the killing of George Floyd, and just everything that people are going through together right now, we wanted to take some time to highlight some of our various vibrant communities from around the state. And one thing Ibrahim and I really wanted everyone to know that we're passionate about is that we know that, no vote is guaranteed to anybody. No group of voters is a monolith. But we do want to take the time tonight to highlight some of the efforts to get different people from all kinds of backgrounds to the polls this year. And we also want to look to the future, because the reality is we're not going to probably know all of the results we want to know tonight, but no matter what does happen, everybody has to get up tomorrow as Minnesotans. We've got to keep going, and we've got to keep doing whatever work we see fit. So thank you again so much for joining us. Our first guest that we want to bring in is one of our very own NPR News wonderful people who are out there contributing every day. One of our senior photojournalists, Christine Nguyen. So I think she's going to pop up. Oh, there she is. Hi.
Hello. How's it going?
Thanks for being here. So, Christine, we know that you are overseeing a group of, I think you said 9 photojournalists that are across the state. So you're going to talk a little bit about what they've been seeing.
For sure. Yeah. We had photojournalists over in Duluth, Fond du Lac Reservation, over throughout the Twin Cities, Moorhead, and some of the rural areas, and they've been out just covering and photographing what's been going on. Basically, things have been a little bit different this year with election, and there's been a lot of COVID precautions, and so. Yeah, they've just been documenting what voting has looked like, what democracy has looked like throughout the state.
And Christine, what exactly, are they seeing? Is it, are they seeing more crowded places, or things are a bit empty?
It's been really steady, no matter if you were in a rural part of the state or if you've been in one of the urban areas like Minneapolis. Things have been really steady. Tom Baker was up in Anoka County, and there were about 100 people when he first got there, even before the polling place opened. And even at one of the churches in north of Moorhead, they had a steady stream of voters coming in. Even if it was a smaller polling location, there was a steady stream of people just coming in.
Well, and it's no surprise with how many Americans we know have cast their ballots early that people weren't seeing tons of lines. We know that in some of the early voting days leading up to today, we were seeing people across the state waiting in 2-3 hour long lines. So it's great to see that so many people in record numbers did participate in early voting. One of the things that we've been tracking in our newsrooms is things like disinformation or intimidation efforts, or people showing up to polling places. Anyone on the ground for you, Christine, see anything like that of concern?
Actually, no. That was one of the things that people were keeping an eye out for specifically, to make sure that they weren't seeing that. But they said it was really smooth going every place that they went to, no matter where they went. I think some of the things that just struck them was not like the people who might be there for to intimidate voters, but just how easy things were for people. And of course, there were a couple of times when they maybe have seen a machine go down, but again, that happens every year, so it was easy.
Yeah. And that's in line, too, with what we're hearing from our state officials. Steve Simon's going to be on, a Secretary of State, later with Mike and Tom over on the MPR side, and we'll tune into that as well. Attorney General Keith Ellison had said that everything seems to be running smoothly, too, so that's really great. And just thank you so much for being our eyes and ears out there. So many times our photojournalists are the ones who have to be out there. COVID or no COVID, they're out there and they're bringing us that information. So we really, really appreciate your time. Thank you. And I hope it's not too late of a night for you tonight. Thanks, Christine.
Thank you. Bye.
So we're going to move along. We have a lot of guests tonight we're very excited about. And now we want to welcome Dr. Joe Hobaugh, who's been waiting patiently for us. He is head of the American Indian OIC, and we're just hoping he'll pop up here with us any moment. Oh, there you are. Hey.
Hi,
thanks so much
evening.
for being here. We really appreciate your time. I wanted to talk to you, for starters. I don't know what you've seen out there today and if you wanted to talk about that at all, but I know that your organization has led some culturally supportive early voting events. Do you want to talk a little bit about your organization's efforts to get out the vote?
Sure. Yeah, sure. So we've been in the work of the Get Out the Vote integrated voter engagement for a few election cycles. And this year, beginning in October, we had weekly early voting escorts with our community members to the early voting centers in Minneapolis. And then this culminated in a really grand event on Thursday, October 29th, just this past week. And really what we tried to do is stitch together the other community-based organizations in the American Indian community here in Minneapolis to provide a wealth of services on this event kind of day. And so the Native American Community Clinic was on site, providing free flu shots. Our friends at the powwow grounds are providing free Indian tacos so you'd be fed. And then, of course, our organization partnered with Make Voting a Tradition, which is from the Native American Community Development Institute. And these were all coming together to get folks educated on what a ballot may look like, what are some of the key posts that are up for the election. And we wanted to make sure that they were informed. And then finally, we brought in the American Indian movement, who has been a stalwart defender and protector of our people. They reestablished their bona fides in our community during the civil unrest period by guarding properties. And in reading what was happening in the papers with the threats of intimidation, we wanted to reorientate that whole argument to talk about those who would deal in those tactics are really the ones who are afraid. And so let's go together as a community and let's exercise our power. Let's show the world who we are as the American Indian people of Minneapolis, and let's not be afraid, and let's go together. And it came together in a very nice community event. It was a little cold, but that's Minnesota. You do what you can. And we ended up getting in the triple digits. We had about 300 some odd folks that came through and ended up getting down to the polls. We had probably about 500 or so that were there in total. Not all were eligible voters. So it was a really successful day, and we really brought about kind of a community sense of fun to this really important activity of exercising our civic duty. Backing up to your first question about anything that we're seeing here in the polls today, we've had some random reports of folks utilizing some political paraphernalia to try to intimidate folks, but from what we're hearing from our staff and our community partners that are on the ground, that things have been moving efficiently, been moving smoothly. And I think it's to earlier points that you made that a significant amount of vote was cast already early. And so we're just continuing to encourage people right up to the end. Get in line if you're in line at 7:58 or 7:59 p.m., stay there and do your duty. And so we've been really happy with the efforts put forward.
Yeah, and speaking of that, I was kind of curious. Have you noticed any significant efforts by any party or candidates to gain more support from your communities?
Well, as we pursued these efforts, and in particular at our event on the 29th, we opened it to all candidates and all parties to come in and engage and speak with our community. We're a nonprofit, so we maintain a strict adherence to being bipartisan. But truth be told, it was pretty one-sided as the Democratic and Farmer Labor Party did come forward and was there in force, from Minnesota Justice Paul Thiessen to our Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan came and spoke. We had Minneapolis School Board council members come through. Just prior to our big event, we had an interaction with our community with Senator Tina Smith, Representative Hadan Hassan, which is local. She has been a powerful force in engagement with our community members, as well as Ilhan Omar, who's been meeting with us. And quite surprisingly, not only has this been virtually because we're trying to be socially responsible with the pandemic, but we've had physical interactions as well. safe, 6 feet apart, masked, of course, but there was no compunction about getting out and trying to do the best that they can in terms of retail politics. And so it was pretty one-sided, although all were welcome.
I wondered if you wouldn't mind talking a little bit about what has historically been barriers to voting for Native American or American Indian communities, and what your hope is to work around some of those, or what you've utilized to work around some of those barriers.
Traditionally, what I've seen is kind of a general antipathy towards government entities and programs. Oftentimes, it's been a negative encounter. And so any kind of step forward into official exercises like casting a ballot is seen with some trepidation. We also see some of the barriers with housing issues and stability of residence. What's really helped overcome that is the rather progressive and effective same-day voter registration and the rules and regulations in terms of registering voters. That information in hand, our staff has gone out and helped people collect those pieces of information that can verify their address, verify their identity, and the ease of going into an early voting center, registering that same day and casting a ballot has really eliminated a significant portion of those barriers. But there again, coming together in community. Oftentimes folks don't want to go by themselves. So when we can get a group of our elders to go with a group of our young folk, we see a lot more interest and a lot more willingness to go ahead and participate. And so we pull on all these levers so we can get folks to the poll and pull on the lever that counts the most.
And what happens after, after this? Does the effort kind of stop until next election cycle, or there's an effort to continue with this?
There's an ongoing effort in between the previous election cycle and this current election cycle. We spent a lot of time and effort around the census, which is very important for American Indian people in terms of the way funding mechanisms work at the federal level. We also continue on with, we consider it part of our advocacy work, and we continue on with engagements with our elected officials. It's important for our youth and our elders to continue to engage with our elected office holders, to continue to be cognizant of the issues that are deeply impactful to them. And particularly at our organization, the American Indian OIC, we have education programs. We have a contract alternative high school as well as an adult basic education GED program. So integrated voter engagement and the civic engagement with office holders is really woven into our educational experience for our learners as well.
It's
so
interesting.
I was just saying, the polls may have closed, but the work goes on and it will continue to go on.
Sure thing. And it's just interesting that you mentioned young people, because we know that the numbers are already showing that some of our youngest voters across the nation have just been showing up in record-breaking droves, which is exciting to think about young people having so much fire within them. Is that something that you've noticed as well?
It is. We take a special effort to include our youth. They are our future leaders, and in our traditional practices, we're always thinking of the seventh generations down the road. But some of this is really kind of evidence of what's happening circumstantially with the civil unrest, the murder of George Floyd. It wasn't too hard to activate and engage our youth. They were already there, and they've been leading the way in so many ways. So our job is to help facilitate and be with them shoulder to shoulder. So that's what's really exciting, is to see this energy moving our elders to vote as well.
And we're almost nearing our end of our segment. I'm so sorry, Ibrahim. I just wanted to make sure that we were able to ask the question that Ibrahim and I really wanted to ask everybody, which is, regardless of how things turn out, what are your hopes for the future, for your communities, for Minnesotans, for everybody?
Well, first and foremost, I'm proud of my state, and I'm proud of this country as we exercise our civic duty. We see high turnout, which means that we're doing this democratic experiment and we're doing it well. And so that's the source of pride. And I have some family and my children. This is why they do this, so we can exercise this right. What I hope for my community is we have a long road to go. We have a lot of disparities to overcome, but we have made some great headway. And so we want to continue to help our people prosper and thrive and become the future leaders that we need them to be, because they are going to lead the way in so many issues. And they're going to draw upon our indigenous wisdoms and our indigenous teachings, which are going to be the ample source of energy and wisdom that are going to guide us to the solutions we need to address many of our problems.
Great. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it, Dr. Hobaugh. Please take care of yourself. And I think with that, we're ready to kick it over for our first segment with Tom Cran on the radio.
Ahead of Election Day, that there are some signs that seniors, who we know typically turn out in pretty big numbers, are shifting away from President Trump and toward Joe Biden. These numbers coming in Florida, where in 2016 they made up about 21% of the electorate, and the president carried them 4 years ago by double digits.
And you're listening to live special coverage of the 2020 election from NPR News.
Right here on MPR News, I'm Tom Cran in the Twin Cities with Mike Mulcahy. We're both in the newsroom tonight on an election night like no other, election night 2020. And Mike, I would toss to you at this point on election nights and say, what are you seeing? What numbers have come in? What do we know about results?
Well, in terms of Minnesota, we don't know anything, Tom.
Anything,
because
yeah.
polls closed 15 minutes ago. We do know that there were some people still in line at some polling places. In particular, some outstate Minnesota polling places. We were getting some reports of that. So no numbers to report yet. We will be patient, as we mentioned a few minutes ago, because it could be a long night. We'll see what happens.
All right. When we have results, we'll bring them to you. A reminder, if you know somebody in one of those lines and they were in line at 8 o'clock, they still get a chance to vote, and that could be the delay here. We are watching the presidential race here in Minnesota, the 10 electoral votes of Minnesota. To whom will they go? We're watching a U.S. Senate race between Tina Smith and Jason Lewis, and all 8 House races, and all of the races in the Minnesota legislature, House and Senate, 201 of them. Let's bring in Brian Bax, who covers all of this on a regular basis, joining us tonight, as he will be throughout the night here on NPR News. Brian, good evening. Tell us what you're especially watching tonight.
Well, I'm watching that top of the ticket race very closely because that will determine a lot of how these other races shake out as well, because a lot is tied to the turnout of the Trump and the Biden campaigns, the efforts that they've made. We've seen an unprecedented effort in modern times by the Republicans coming in here quite often. The president was here 4 times in the last few months of this campaign. And of course, Joe Biden came through a couple of times, including the last weekend on Friday he was here. So both campaigns really saw Minnesota as a state that either need to shore up, or in the Donald Trump's case, a state that potentially could give him 10 votes he might need to patch up for losses elsewhere.
Are you hearing anything, Brian, behind the scenes from your sources about how they think things went today and in the past few weeks, I guess, with early voting?
Democrats were really enthusiastic about those early voting numbers. There were more than 1.8 million people who put a ballot in prior to Election Day, and Democrats were watching those very closely. They felt like they had an edge there. Republicans have always been leaning on this idea that their voters were going to come out on Election Day, that they were going to be there in force. And as you mentioned, we're seeing reports of places in the exurbs and places in further reaches of Minnesota where there still are decent-sized lines as the polls were getting ready to close, and perhaps even now we have reporters on the scene, and we hope to hear more about that. But Donald Trump really need to make up ground in greater Minnesota. He banked a lot of his standing on how he would fare there. If you notice where he came to Rochester, he came to Mankato, he came to Bemidji, he came to Duluth. He didn't come anywhere near the Twin Cities, where Joe Biden is expected to have an advantage in the urban core and a lot of the suburbs, which kind of had turned against the president in his time. So Donald Trump really needed to run up the score in a lot of these places he was going to win anyway.
Remind us again, Brian, take us back to 2016 and why, for Donald Trump, he had such a focus on the state of Minnesota and its 10 electoral votes.
Well, if you look at all of our neighbors were in Donald Trump's column, including Wisconsin and Michigan and Iowa. And those were states that not long ago had been pretty consistently Democratic in a lot of these races. Minnesota was almost a trophy state, and he came within 45,000 votes despite spending very little time and very little money here. But I'd like to remind people that Hillary Clinton underperformed Barack Obama's numbers in the 2 races that he ran, and there was quite a bit of bleed to third-party candidates. I'm not sure that we're going to see as much bleed off to third-party candidates this time, which, for these 2 gentlemen, where do those voters go? Will voters who stayed home last time show up? That's what we're really watching for tonight.
And it's interesting when you look back at 2016, Trump's vote totals here weren't much better than Mitt Romney's, really, in 2012, but it was that Hillary Clinton underperformed.
That's exactly right. Donald Trump got about what the 1.3 million votes that Republicans tend to get. And remember, Barack Obama got 1.5 million votes when he was running. So that's kind of been a target number of Democrats. If they feel like they can get to that number or above it, they feel like they'll be in pretty good shape. But if the margin is close, as we mentioned, these dominoes are going to fall in a lot of other places, and a lot of these legislative races where these candidates might need a lift from the top of the ticket, depending on where they are. That could determine whether the Democrats have control of the legislature or Republicans, or it's split again.
All right, our Brian Bax will be checking in throughout the night here on MPR News and bring you results as they come in. And so far in Minnesota, no results to pass on at 8:20.
Support for NPR's elections coverage comes from Drexel University.
Back
Drexel's
in this
academic model
segment,
is
we
designed
want
to
to look
prepare
at the
visionary
political
leaders to
engagement
address the challenges
of
of a changing world. More at drexel.edu/ambition can't wait.
Welcome back. In this segment, we want to look at the political engagement of African and Muslim immigrants in Minnesota. We have two guests who will be talking about the voting history of these new Americans, their political priorities, and the reasons that are driving them to the polling stations. There is Hiba Ansari, a reporter for Sahan Journal, who has covered everything from politics to culture and religion. We also have Mustafa Jamale, who is a political director for Voice for Refuge Action Fund and co-founder of the Black Immigrant Collective. Welcome, Mustafa and Hiba. I wanted to start. Yeah, thank you. I wanted to start with you, Hiba. When we talk about Muslims in Minnesota, we are, of course, not talking about one community. How diverse is the community? And what did you observe in your reporting regarding the political engagement of Muslims in the state?
Yeah, so it's quite diverse. You obviously have the East African here, but you also have Indian Muslims, Pakistani Muslims, Arab Muslims, etc. involved here in Minnesota. Today, actually, I've been covering the state house race in District 37B. Amir Malik is the DFL candidate there, and he's Pakistani. He's running in Blaine, which is a fairly split district, and the Republican incumbent, Nolan West, won by just razor-thin margins in his last two elections. So in 2018, Amir lost by just 150 votes. And so he's seriously upped his door-knocking game, even during the pandemic, because that's the best way to reach his voters right now. In 2018, he actually registered about 1,000 new voters, most of whom were actually Muslim. But this time around, he's definitely expanded his reach beyond that too. So it looks like he definitely has a strong chance, but that's been an interesting race to follow.
Yeah, that's good. And I know that you have spoken with voters about their hopes and fears for the elections. What have they told you?
So most of the people that I've spoken with say that they are afraid that if the president loses, he won't accept the outcome. And they, like all of us, are hoping for a graceful transition of power. The Somali community specifically is also afraid that if Trump does win, he'll continue to attack the community here in Minnesota, especially, whether that's at rallies or even through further restriction on immigration for Somalis and for people from Muslim majority countries in general. Another concern that, of course, isn't really Muslim specific, but it has affected immigrant communities disproportionately is the pandemic. People that we've spoken with just want this to be over, and because they're impacted at higher rates, that hope that we can enter this new administration with a better pandemic response is that much higher.
Hiba, I understand you did a story with some first-time voters, and they're not only first-time voters, but they're trying to recruit other people in their communities to vote. What do you think? You kind of touched on a lot of the really remarkable, crazy things that have happened this year. But why do you think what about this election stands out to you as being so critical?
Yeah, I think what stands out to me in terms of how the Muslim community has become more mobilized is just the enthusiasm and the recognition that the stakes are high for us. So, for example, like you said, in terms of first-time voters, I think you were referencing Abdullahi Farah, who I wrote about in my story. he hadn't voted for 15 years. He just didn't feel like it was important. And now he's one of the lead organizers of a group called Faith in Minnesota. He also founded the Muslim Coalition, which is a group of 20 mosques that are trying to get Muslims more civically engaged here. So when it comes to Muslims like Abdullahi, for example, they became mobilized after their mosque was bombed in 2017 by white supremacists. The mosque is called Dar al-Farouk in Bloomington. So it isn't just a policy that Muslims are concerned about. It's literally a matter of safety, which is a pretty compelling reason to get people to the polls. And like I said, since then, some 20 mosques in Faith in Minnesota specifically came together to door knock for candidates who don't just acknowledge the Muslim community, but have their best interests in mind too. They're also phone banking for them. They're driving people to the polls, handing out voter information at their mosques, which 20 years ago was pretty much unheard of. But yeah, the stakes are high for Muslims for a variety of other reasons too. We're concerned about affordable housing, healthcare, unemployment during the pandemic. Again, these are all issues driving Muslims to the polls. But because we've historically been sort of othered by the political establishment, people just weren't as enthusiastic about voting or getting involved as much as they are now. But in terms of how they vote, and maybe we're getting to that in a second.
No,
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Okay. I was going to say, in terms of how they vote, Muslims do tend to vote strongly Democrat, and they are definitely leery of Trump. The numbers do show that. But I guess the community here in Minnesota is really emphasizing not just increasing voter turnout, but to also get involved in other ways, whether that be through working on campaigns, negotiating with campaigns, or actually running for office.
And yeah, I mean, just one other quick question. So when you talk about, Muslims getting involved, are we talking about the younger people, the older folks, kind of, are they mixed, or most of the people that you have spoken with or have seen doing this work are younger people?
It's actually surprising, but it is pretty mixed. You would maybe think that younger Muslims are going to be more involved, but it is pretty mixed across the board. You have, a lot of elected officials from the Somali community in Minnesota who have been involved for a very long time. But then you have kind of newer voters, whether it's because they just turned 18 or they're just starting to kind of see the stake they have in the election, also becoming more involved. When it comes to volunteering, you'll have maybe older members of the community door knocking and talking to people face to face, but then you'll also have the younger volunteers phone banking and doing some of the social media and things like that. So it really does vary across the board. It also varies in terms of both men and women being involved at pretty much equal capacities, which is also really great to see. But yeah.
Yeah, thank you. That's a lot. That's great. Mustafa, I wanted to turn to you. African immigrants, especially Somalis, have lived in Minnesota, of course, for a very long time, 30 years and more. But their political participation has never been this conspicuous. What has changed over the past decade? I mean, I'm very obsessed with this fact that in 2016, Abdi Warsame was the highest official, and he was only city council. And now we have, Ilhan Omar, and then 2 state legislatures. Maybe Abdi Fatih may win. So when you look at the Black immigrant in Minnesota and their participation, what has changed over the past at least 4 years, but also going back to 10 years?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Ibrahim. Thank you for having me. I would say, just to take a step back, I would say in the early 2000s, Somali nonprofit organizations like Somali Action Alliance, Iskuron, the Confederation of Somali Communities, and other C3 organizations have really built the base for the political power that particularly the Somali community has these days. They got a lot of folks civically engaged, encouraged many people to get involved in their neighborhoods at the city level, as well as help folks through the citizenship process. So I would say like the Somali community went from over the last 20 years from just being part of the political machine, like a reliant vote for the Democratic Party, to being elected officials themselves. I want to say the first Somali person who ran for office is this guy whose his name is Sadiq Warfa. I think these days he's a minister in Somalia. But Sadiq's race was unsuccessful. And right after him, we had the late Hussein Samatar run for office, and he was the first Somali person that was elected to office. So through this process, you know, a lot of folks went from being like passive participants in our democratic process, in our civic process, to actually pushing against the democratic machine and challenging folks, challenging incumbents that have been in office for decades. The case can be said for Ilhan Omar's first race against Phyllis Khan. So I would say yes. So that's pretty much how this transformation happened.
Yeah, and you are the founding director of the Voice for Refuge Action Fund. You're also the co-founder of the Black Immigrant Collective. But tell me a little bit more about the Voice for Refuge Action Fund and the role that it played in mobilizing these Black communities, especially immigrants.
That's also a really good question. So Voice for Refuge Action Fund is the first 501c4 organizations. And so C4 organizations can endorse candidates. They can be more political, more partisan. They cannot necessarily coordinate with candidates, but they can run their own phone banks in support of those folks and whatnot. And so Voice for Refuge Action Fund was created because this administration has systematically attacked Black and brown folks. Particularly, we have seen like how Black immigrants, particularly Somalis, been impacted by the Muslim ban. The refugee resettlement program under this administration was cut by more than 80%. Just last week, this administration decided that they were going to cap next year's admission numbers to 15,000. And that's the lowest it's ever been since 1980. And so Voice for Refuge was created to really push back against these kinds of toxic policies that really divide communities. And so in Minnesota in particular, we've endorsed 43 candidates this election cycle, and the majority of them are in Minnesota. And so what we've been doing has been a lot of like messaging online, directing people to vote for candidates like Sahara Odawa, I think who's running in suburban Minneapolis. There's a candidate in Wilmer, Ida, who's running for a city council seat. So for a number of those folks, you know, we've been able to endorse them, direct our volunteers to them to support their candidacies. However, I will say in Minnesota, we can't necessarily take credit for Black turnout. Organizations like Iskuron, Minnesota Voice, ACER, which stands for African Career Resource Inc., really did a lot of work to mobilize folks out there. If I'm not mistaken, ACER hired like 45 Black immigrant youth to canvass their communities. And so I think a lot of folks know what's at stake. You know, they know that their auntie or their cousin is in a refugee camp in Somalia, looking and waiting for these results tonight, because that will decide really the fate of those folks. And we have felt this pressure, you know, under this administration. He's come back to Minnesota, I want to say like 3 times, and called out the Somali community in particular. This is how he builds his base, right? This is how he activates this very racist, white supremacist kind of rhetoric that gets these folks out, when we know refugees and immigrants have only been a boom to Minnesota. And so...
Yeah, and I think we have just 1 minute. What's your hope for the future for these communities? Maybe I could ask that. Go ahead, Mustafa.
Well, I'll be really quick. I think a lot of us want normalcy. We know that this administration, this incoming administration, if it does happen, if Biden wins, which I'm I'm crossing my fingers. It'll be a lot of work for us to really rebuild these programs that have been tarnished over the last 4 years, to repeal these very discriminatory policies that have been established by this administration. And so I think one is like, yes, a deep breath and back to normalcy, but also like making these programs even better than what they used to be. So I think a lot of us are just excited for that part.
Thank you both so much for your contributions. Take care of yourselves in the coming days, and I think we're going to check back in with Tom Cran on MPR News.
Where people who are in line still be able to vote. Our Peter Cox at one polling station in Farmington, where a lot of people are still in line, and people said it took them an hour and 40 minutes to get through the line. So we're beginning to get some numbers here in Minnesota. Mike Mulcahy here with me throughout the evening. What are we seeing, Mike?
Well, Tom, just a few votes trickling in now. About 5% of the precincts are reporting. In the presidential race in Minnesota, Joe Biden out to an early lead, 65% to Donald Trump's 33%. In the U.S. Senate race, Tina Smith, the Democrat incumbent, with 60% to Jason Lewis, the Republican's 33%. But, Tom, one thing we can say for sure, these numbers are going to change a lot because there just aren't many in yet. So be patient. That's the watchword for tonight. Patience will get you through.
All right, patience, the watchword, as we turn now to Secretary of State Steve Simon overseeing today's election. My first general question for you, Secretary of State, how did it go today?
It went extremely well, just from an administrative standpoint. I mean, almost glitch-free. The weather was great. I can't take credit for that. But there were other indicators that things went really smoothly. Low wait times when there were wait times, generally speaking, good traffic flow, plenty of PPE and supplies, no shortage of election judges, no significant conflicts to report. We thought there might be conflicts over masks or political apparel or voter suppression. Really no notable complaints about those things either.
We are hearing, though, Secretary of State Simon, that there are still some lines in some ex-urban and rural areas. Are you hearing that, too?
I am as well. They're the exception, not the rule. But, you know, the rule in Minnesota is, of course, if you're in line by 8 o'clock, you can still vote. And there could be that there was a post-work rush. There could be other logistical issues for that. But people should just stick in line and wait it out, and they will get to vote as they should.
All right, I want to ask you what we will be seeing tonight when we see numbers posted on the Secretary of State's website with all of the early voting. What was it, close to 2 million ballots before people even went to the polls today? What will we be seeing?
You will be seeing totals that include all the votes cast today in person, and you will be seeing all or substantially all of the absentee ballots that have been cast up until now. That is, those who went in person or those who sent their vote in by mail. There might not be a 100% count. The legislature gave all counties and cities an extra 2 days to count what's come in by now. And so there's no guarantee it will all be there, but I think a very big number will be there tonight. You'll also have information, this is something we've never done before, on the numbers of outstanding absentee ballots by Minnesota House District. You'll see on the results page, you'll have to click, just one click, to get to that table, but that will help you in the news media and others to make informed choices about how to call certain races. I think we'll have outcomes and winners known in a lot of contests either tonight or very shortly thereafter.
Are you getting any sense on turnout? 4 years ago, it was 74%. What are you thinking tonight?
All indicators point towards going higher than that. The modern day high was about 77% or so in 2008. I think we're on pace to reach or exceed that. The next barrier to be broken would be 80%. The last time we did that was 1956. And that is certainly a possibility. There was a lot of electricity out there when it comes to voting this year.
Tell us, when it comes to those ballots that are postmarked but will be coming in late, and we had the court ruling on that, the sequestered ballots, they will not be included in any of the tallies or totals that you're talking about online?
Well, obviously not tonight, but tomorrow, the ones that come in tomorrow, most of them will be included in tomorrow's daily update to the rolling total.
All right.
So you'll have the biggest chunk tonight, and then we'll have a daily update based on what the counties report to us tomorrow night and Thursday night and so on, all the way up until next Tuesday. We will be counting every single ballot, every single contest, all over Minnesota and adding those to the tables, to the totals. It will be up to someone to go to a court and ask for the court to back those numbers out of the totals. It will be up to them to do that. They will have to do it. Nothing will happen automatically.
But if ballots arrive tomorrow, they'll be posted, counted and posted eventually tomorrow.
Correct.
Secretary of State Steve Simon, who oversees the state's elections, thank you for your time on this election night 2020.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And we'll continue our coverage online at mprnews.org and on the air right here on MPR News. Stay with us on election night.
Support for NPR's elections coverage comes from Drexel University. Drexel's academic model is designed to prepare visionary leaders to address the challenges of a changing world. More at drexel.edu/ambition can't wait.
From NPR News, this is special coverage of the 2020 election. I'm Lulu Garcia-Navarro.
And I'm Ari Shapiro. Results so far, according to the Associated Press, give Joe Biden an early lead in the electoral vote count with 131 votes to President Trump's 92. Polls have closed in a majority of the country, but the outcome is not.
And you heard a little bit of our national public radio programming there, but we want to come back and talk to some local people, some Minnesotans. I think we have one of our guests is joining us right now. It's hard remotely to get together and talk, but we're trying our best here. So it sounds like we have Ryan Perez of Copal, who is here to talk. Hey! Oh, and you've got your mask. That's wonderful. Thank you so much for being with us. So your organization tracks, advocates for our Latino community across the state. Do you want to talk a little bit about how the day's been so far from your perspective and just some of your efforts and your organization's effort to make sure people are headed to the polls today?
Yes, thank you, and thank you for having me. Copal is a recently formed a few years ago Latino civic engagement nonprofit. We probably have the largest Latino vote engagement program in the state. I think today was really a positive thing, and I heard some of Secretary Simon's remarks. Mm-hmm. And same here, there was we prepared for the likelihood of voter intimidation, of other issues faced by Latino voters at the polling place. And we had 75 folks stationed across the state in 7 priority cities. And for the most part, there were very few incidents reported. A lot of it was, not a lot of long lines, which was really good. The early vote, I think, really helped with that. And for the most part, people felt really safe and comfortable voting and were attended to pretty quickly. So I have to say I'm very proud of how Election Day went today.
And I wondered, too, along those lines, we've been hearing so much about young people turning out to vote, some of our youngest voters. What have you seen with the age demographics? Anything standing out to you there?
What we've really seen, and without giving you any statistics, the movement and the work we're doing right now has built by so many young volunteers, some of which who are not even eligible to vote, whether they're too young or they don't have citizenship. But we have just a huge flow of young people saying, this is the first time I'm ever getting involved in politics. I really see the need now to get involved in our elections. And so I'm really curious to see as the results come in, if the data reflects that high youth turnout that we seem to be seeing from conversations.
Yeah, and you mentioned people who are, DACA recipients, people who are not able to vote themselves, taking it upon themselves to help with some of those efforts because they realize that it's going to impact their futures as well. And it sounds like COVID-19, do you think that was something that you would think it would stand in the way of folks getting to the polls, but it sounds like there weren't a lot of issues. So I wonder, how do you feel like the pandemic has played in to this election cycle?
We have a really interesting, I think, 2 forces. One is that there's an amazing energy about getting involved in this election because of the various ways it's impacting people's lives in a way that I've never seen before, this interest in getting involved. But the barriers of this election are also probably the highest they've ever been because of the challenge of absentee voting. The amount of tools that are available online create specific language challenges for a lot of our community members. And so you kind of feel this push and pull. We cannot meet people in the community in the same way that we traditionally do because there's just a lot less in-person events, and that's one of the best ways to reach new voters. And so I've kind of been wondering how this balance is actually going to play out in practice because people seem to have a high level of interest in overcoming those barriers. We talked to about 10 people just this morning who just walked by our office, said, "Hey, I heard about you guys on TV. Can you help me with my ballot application? Can you help me with, whatever I need to get done?" And we provided that service to them. And so despite how high the level of hurdle is, people have been really trying to accomplish the vote this year.
Mm-hmm. It sounds like we have our second guest, Joey Peters, reporter for Sahan Journal with us. Hey, thanks for making it with us. Ibrahim, do you have some questions for Joey?
Yeah, Joe, it's good to see you. Are you at home or something?
I'm at home, yeah. I had to call
Yes. So, yeah, I mean, it's really great to see you. So, you've written a number of stories about on the impact that the summer riots had on the Latino community. Has this been a significant factor, this election, a significant, these riots, a significant factor in the decision making process of, who they vote for, whether they want to vote for Biden or Trump?
I would say that I've spoken to some people within the Latino community who definitely cited the defund the police efforts and the discussion on defund the police as a reason for their supporting Trump. But I'd say that this is a pretty small number of Latino voters I've talked with. And from sources and organizations, it sounds like a majority here in Minnesota are backing Biden, and they're citing issues like immigration reform, the virus and how it's impacting their community as some of their major factors going into this election.
Yeah, and I think this is for both of you. What's your hope for these communities, regardless of the outcome of this election?
Well, this election for a lot of people we work with is an election based on self-defense. And so no matter what candidate they're voting for, they're doing it to protect something, for the most part, is what we hear on the ground. And I want to move our community from a position of just defending what we have to really envisioning what a better future looks like. Really envisioning, what are the things you're struggling to make on the day-to-day, whether it's healthcare access, good education for your kids, and envision what does that, ideal future look like for you. And so a lot of people we hear are frustrated with the way candidates aren't addressing some of these really core needs. And I think those policy conversations will hopefully be able to happen into 2021.
Yeah, and Ryan, I just wanted to follow up because I think we have some time. We can come back to these hope questions. I think you were talking about early on, the Latino communities. I mean, I know that with other communities as well, when elections are happening, politicians would just come in and talk about what they're going to do for them. And then when elections are done, then you will never see them. I mean, that's the complaints that I've seen throughout my reporting career. Is that the same for the Latino community? Are folks, tired of politicians coming to them and then not seeing them again? And what are you and other folks doing about that?
Well, I think a key factor is that there is no, I often talk about Latino communities with an S because there's so many different groups that, have different interests and different policy proposals, for example, that they're pushing. And an example is that with car titles, there is some legislation offered by the Democrats that used the matricula consular, which is the Mexican ID, in order to allow people who are undocumented, who have the matricula as their document, to be able to get the car title. That was an issue that helped the Mexican community, but left out undocumented Salvadorans, other members of Central and South American countries who did not have that type of ID. And I bring up this example because in that way, the Democrats claimed to show up, but showed up in a way that missed huge swaths of the community and didn't address a lot of basic needs. And so that is to say that a lot of times parties will show up, claim that they're ready to support the community, do some things that are very, piecemeal, that don't get at a lot of the core issues facing communities, and then and then they do leave until the next election to make new promises. And so what is important with us when I speak to our community members that are interested in becoming leaders and organizers is that there's constant pressure on elected officials to continue to make change.
Yeah, and Joey, I wanted to ask you this very quickly too. A couple of years ago, I did a story on, covering a story about the Latino communities, and how that was 2016. And then I met a father and his 16-year-old daughter getting people out to vote. So the 16-year-old, of course, can't vote. And then I asked the father why he was doing this, and he couldn't vote because he was undocumented. But here we have two people who can't vote, but at the same time doing this work, making sure people are able to vote. Have you seen, and of course that's not a unique to this one father and daughter. Have you seen similar things where people who are not eligible to vote are actually trying to do something so that they're able to get what they want to get in, to either stay in this country or get their programs going?
A lot of the people that I've spoken with at organizations like Copal or Unidos Minnesota, they might be DACA, or some might be undocumented and not able to vote themselves, but they're kind of at the forefront of getting their communities out to vote. So I definitely see a lot of that. And I just think in general, this is a rapidly growing community in Minneapolis, and Pew Research Center is estimating this year 127,000 Latinos of voting age in Minnesota. So yeah, I hope to see that the political participation continues to grow.
Ryan, I know that this summer a lot of Latino businesses were impacted by unrest following the killing of George Floyd on Lake Street. Do you have any updates for how are people doing in terms of some of those rebuilding efforts? Just generally speaking, what are you hearing?
Yeah, that's it's a point of a lot of conversation, because what a lot of the national conversations about uprising, protest, and destruction kind of miss is that a lot of the damage hit Lake Street, which is historically the heart of the Latino community in Minnesota, but also Black and brown communities have a lot of new businesses based around Lake Street. And so what we're hit is a lot of families who are starting businesses that were their entryway into the middle class, or to grow their communities and improve their communities. And so there, of course, was a lot of initial negative reaction to that. But what's key, and the conversations we've continued to have, is to focus on the fact that what we all want is safety. And, when we talk about it at Copal, we've been saying, well, as a business owner, you're looking for safety. And so are a lot of undocumented Latinos who are victims of police oftentimes, other darker skinned Latinos who are often victims of police, and Afro-Latinos, and also other Black and African-American members of our community. So the interest in safety is the same. And what has that's been missed in a lot of the rhetoric around this conversation. And so I think in Minnesota, we have unique demographic situation. Most of the Latinos here are Mexican. Most that can vote are a second generation. And so the political dynamic here is a lot different than other states. But I mean, this election, I think, will be a tell about how Latinos in Minnesota have decided to vote based on those understandings.
Thank you for that update. And Joey, did you want to answer the question about hopes for the future? We're trying to focus on the future, and we wondered if we should ask journalists what their hopes are, and we don't want to get into opinions, but I think journalists can have hopes too. So I wondered, there has been a lot of divisive rhetoric and things like that this year, maybe more than in past years. What are you hoping for after the election?
Well, yeah, maybe less of that. But also, when you look at numbers provided for previous elections, you see the number of voting age population in Latinos going up. And some would suggest that you've seen voter turnout, even though the Latino vote in Minnesota, it looks historically has been one of the lower ones. Mm-hmm. Some of these numbers suggest the voter turnout increasing. So I think we all would probably like to see more political participation, or that trend continuing in Minnesota.
Wonderful. Thank you both so much for your time. Again, I'm telling everybody, take care of yourselves in the coming days. And we have a bit of breaking news. We want to make sure, I'm sure Tom Cran will touch on this too, but we are relying tonight on the AP to call our races. And they are reporting that Ilhan Omar, Congresswoman Omar, has won her bid for re-election to our 5th congressional district here in Minnesota. So I'm sure we'll be hearing more about that and updates to come. Thank you both again for your time, and we'll be right back in about 5 minutes after a check-in with Tom Cran.
Advisory Council meetings. For specifics on meeting locations, dates, and times, please visit minnesotapublicradio.org.
I'm Tom Cran, MPR News, along with Mike Mulcahy, and we have a result to share, a race that's been called here in Minnesota.
That's right, Tom. Ilhan Omar, the DFL Congresswoman from the 5th District, the Minneapolis area, she has won her re-election effort tonight against Republican Lacey Johnson and Legal Marijuana Now party candidate Michael Moore. The AP has called that race. We're still waiting on most of the other elections in Minnesota tonight. Numbers starting to come in. We've got about 15% of the precincts reporting right now. Joe Biden has a healthy lead over Donald Trump, and Tina Smith has 59% to Jason Lewis, the Republicans, 33%. So we're keeping an eye on those, Tom. Not too close to call so far, but Ilhan Omar, we can say, has won tonight.
You know, it seems that certainly 5th District is Minneapolis and all in Hennepin County, and then the 3rd District, much of it in Hennepin County, and those are the two districts with high reporting right now, 90% in the 5th District and 85% in the 3rd, which means that the votes are coming right now that we're seeing from Minneapolis and Hennepin County.
Well, and a lot of early absentee votes were cast in Hennepin County, too, so that might have something to do with it.
It is an election night unlike any that we remember, partly because of the absentee votes and the very high number of them today, and the COVID-19 pandemic as well. Today, Secretary of State Steve Simon said things have gone exceptionally well. Extremely well is the way he put it today, but there were some areas in the suburbs and exurbs with long lines at poll closing time, which was about 57 minutes ago. Our Peter Cox is at one of those polling places. It's in Farmington. And Peter Cox, tell us what you're seeing. Still a line there, or are people getting through?
So the line is pretty much finally through, but when I got here, it was wrapped all the way around the building. I talked to voters who were coming out right when I got here, which was probably around 8:30, who said they'd spent an hour and 45 minutes in line. They said this was mostly because they had consolidated 3 different precincts into one building.
No.
And also because of COVID restrictions, they had fewer people inside. So it was just kind of the perfect storm for a lot of people in line.
And when you talk to the people, what was on their mind? What were they voting about, if they were telling you?
Well, actually, I talked to 5 people in line, none of which wanted to talk about who they voted for. Mm-hmm. And I'm not quite sure why that was, but, they all said this election was very important to them, clearly. But they also said, they probably wouldn't have waited in line if it was 30 degrees out. So, I think it was a combination of an important election, but also a decent night in Minnesota.
But those folks are all getting a chance to vote. And thanks so much, Peter Cox in Farmington, for keeping us up to date. Mike Mulcahy will continue to keep everyone up to date here with results as they come in, and analysis from our good friends Maureen Shaver and Todd Rapp.
And Tom, we really should just stop for a minute and say how unusual it is, but how what a moment it is, too, with so many people voting, maybe hitting 80% turnout today. It's something to really take a step back and just marvel at a little bit, I think.
And we will do that throughout the evening. And again, you heard Mara Liasson say it, you heard Mike Mulcahy say it earlier, patience is the watchword tonight when it comes to results. And we have them online, too, at mprnews.org.
Programming is supported by St. Paul Academy and Summit School, hosting a virtual admission open house on Sunday, November 15th. More information at spa.edu, shaping the minds and the hearts of the people who will change the world.
Programming is supported by CenterPoint Energy. You can help lower operating costs and decrease energy use with CenterPoint Energy's rebates on energy-efficient natural gas equipment. The application deadline is December 31st. CenterPointEnergy.com/save now.
Getting a result called by the Associated Press in Minnesota as well in the 3rd Congressional District. We said a lot of votes were coming in Hennepin County, and it looks like Dean Phillips will go to Washington for a second term. That race has been called. His Republican challenger, Kendall Qualls, the 85% in and 57-43, the margin there, percentage-wise. MPR News 91.1, KNOW, Minneapolis, St. Paul. It is 9 p.m. Election night.
From NPR News, this is special coverage of the 2020 election. I'm Ari Shapiro with Michelle Martin. We are still far away from knowing whether Donald Trump has won a second term or if Joe Biden will defeat an incumbent president for the first time in more than 2 decades. What we do know...
Welcome back. We're now joined by State Representative Fu Lee and Bao Van, President of the Hmong American Partnership. Thank you, Representative Fu Lee, for joining us, and thank you, Bao Yang, for joining us. Bao, I wanted to start with you. We have seen some reporting around the Hmong American community and how this community is becoming swing voters. Just, tell us a little bit more about how so.
Sure. Well, first of all, I have to say that for someone who's been doing civic engagement for over the past 15 years, this year is the year where I see so much engagement and discussion when it comes to politics in the Hmong community. And I think that people tend to look at the community and have a biased opinion of whether we're Democrats or Republican. And I would have to say that when you look at the Hmong votes in the Hmong community, this year is the year in which really tells that people are swing voters. Hmong people in the community are swing voters. They vote based on issues. They vote based on what's important to them and what their values are. And so, it's really interesting to see people that voted for a Democrat now are voting for Republicans, and people that were voting for Republicans are going to, voting for Democrats. So I think it's just overall really engaging multi-generation discussion and, really having the elderly generation also seeking advice from what, the educated Hmong children are advising them, or having news media, or having, because of the pandemic and they're at home, there are all these opportunities for information to be available via YouTube or a popular Hmong conference line that's available where people tune in. And they're getting a lot of news, and sometimes not all the news are correct. And so they rely a lot on educated Hmong children and the young professionals to also chime in and help them understand before they cast their vote. So it's just really exciting to see that.
Yeah, and does the Hmong American Partnership kind of do some work around getting the voters out and educating people about the importance of voting?
Yes, voting engagement is part of who we are as a refugee-led organization. And it's really important for us to not only teach our people how to be contributing members of society, but to be fully engaged. And so every year we've done voter education, voter outreach, and voter engagement, taking people to the poll, translating information for people, looking at polling locations, giving any information that our community would need in order to make educated, intelligent decisions.
Yeah, and Representative Fu Lee, the number of eligible Asian American voters in the state grew by 43% between 2012 and 2018. That's 43%. That's a lot. Does this surprise you at all?
It's not surprising for me.
we have seen the trend over the last decade or so, nationally, where Asian American is the fastest growing population in the country. And here, I was just looking at some of the research that we have from the Pew, and they have said that most of this demographic growth is mostly from naturalization of Asian immigrants. And so I think that that's something that's unique to us here in Minnesota, where we are refugee experienced communities, especially Southeast Asians, like myself and Bao, who are Hmong Americans. And then most recently, we have folks coming from Burma as Burmese refugees, the Karenni communities. And so it's not surprising seeing the growth of Asian American voters in the state.
Yeah, and of course, it's not just the number of voters that have grown. The number of people who are getting elected has also grown over the past few years. You are one of them. You got elected in 2016. Just wondering, why did you decide to go into politics? And also, if you know the number, how many, when we talk about folks like you who got elected, how many are we talking about? And what kind of office are they running for and getting elected to?
So for me, getting involved in politics was not a path that I really looked at. For me, growing up, I always wanted to be in public service and to really serve the community because of my own experience, growing up as a refugee child here in North Minneapolis. And so just having been able to work over at the city hall in city of Minneapolis, over at the state legislature, and seeing that we don't have people that look like us, making the decision that are at the table. And so I just wanted to organize and, get community members to come out and vote. And that just led me down the path of running for political office. And I've been fortunate enough to, been elected twice, and then are facing re-election today, and the results are coming in pretty good. And, for all of us, we are seeing that we have Hmong Americans or Asian Americans at all levels of government. At the state level, there's 6 of us, 5 in the Minnesota House, 1 in the Minnesota Senate. We have school board members, both in St. Paul. And then we also have, city council member that you may not think of. We have it in the city of St. Paul. We don't have it in the city of Minneapolis anymore, but we have 2 Hmong American city council member in Southwest Minnesota, in Tracy, Minnesota, and Walnut Groves, Minnesota. And so that shows you the strength and power of the Hmong American community and the Asian American community, where, if we run for office, we have the opportunity to win and represent the communities that we live in, whether that's in the Twin Cities or whether that's in greater Minnesota.
I wondered, and both of you can answer this, and maybe Bao, maybe you want to start. It seems like there was an effort on behalf of the presidential campaigns to court the Hmong American vote and to come here and to have the backdrop of Hmong-owned businesses. What are your thoughts on that, and how well do you think that's worked on either side of the aisle?
Well, I think that people are catching on that Hmong people vote. If you look at the Asian community, although Hmong comprise of one of 50 different ethnic groups within the Asian community, and tends to fall on the lower, spectrum in terms of socioeconomic status, housing, economic prosperity, and so on and so forth. But when it comes to voting, we're actually, one of the top, turnout communities. And so I think people are catching on to that. They're paying attention. As a Representative Fu had already mentioned, we turn out, we are engaged. And so when you can see that when there's a Hmong elected official running, there is more, turnout in that election. And so people are catching on to that. And you can see that when there are races such as the presidential race and even, state and local races, they are turning to the Hmong community and they want those votes. And also, we also have large number of voters in a household. So if you come to a Hmong, potentially you can get anywhere from 4 to 6 voters, and I know when we're phone banking, we're always making sure that we speak to every single one because there's a lot of voters in the home, and I think this has worked well because also they know that in order to get the Hmong vote, that they need to meet the Hmong where the Hmong people are, and so they tend to go to, our shopping centers where we have high foot traffic, accompanying by some of stature in the Hmong community. And so that's their gateway into making their candidacy known and hoping for, those individuals that have some influence in the Hmong community to also share the information, because that's how they know the information gets around, about candidates. So I think, with this election, you can see that there's the Republican Party has been reaching out to key members of our community. We see that Joe Biden has made her way, and has Hmong Shopping Center. There has been greater effort this year than ever from both the Democratic and Republican Party in reaching out to the Hmong community.
Representative Lee, anything to add to that?
Yes, I just want to point out that, back in 2016 when Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump first ran, Hillary Clinton only won the state of Minnesota by less than 46,000 votes. And I think that the figure that Ibrahim and Yusir put up at the beginning were, I believe the eligible voters of Hmong descent in Minnesota is around 40,000 too. And when you think about that, the Hmong community in Minnesota could have swayed that election if, let's say, that we did not turn out at all. That could have swayed Minnesota towards President Trump. And so I think that shows how key, even though we're at 40,000, a growing community in the state of Minnesota. And so all political party, both the Republican parties and, my own party, the DFL party, we need to invest in this community and really show them that, we are there for you, not just during the election, but we will be with you every step of the way, whether that's to address some of the issues that we're seeing around the COVID pandemic or during some of the civil unrest. And so this is where, we really need both parties to really invest in our community. I'm glad that, at least from the DFL side, we are, hiring organizers and canvassers going into the community to really have these deep and meaningful engagement.
Mm-hmm. And you did mention the civil unrest, so I did want to just check in with both of you. I know that a lot of Hmong American-owned businesses were impacted in St. Paul's Midway area and in other areas of the Twin Cities. And I remember talking to one woman who said that her clinic, St. Paul Clinic, had been victimized by arson and it had been burned down. And she said to me, her attitude was just, having come from a war-torn country and being here and being able to be a doctor and being able to follow her dreams, she was able to have this this resilience or positivity, this outlook on it, like it's going to be okay. And that doesn't make it easier that your business was damaged, but I was struck by that resilience, and I wondered if you could just update us all on how those folks are doing.
I think that people are, it's a really tough period. First you get COVID, and then you have the civil unrest. And the civil unrest, I think, just added on the financial hardship, particularly for small businesses. I think that, we hope for improvement, and we hope for, some type of progress, but we know that it's slow in coming. And I think that some of the relief that's been coming down the pipeline has been incredibly challenging in terms of, helping the community to navigate through that, particularly our businesses that are actually at Hmong Village or Hmong Town, which comprise of the older generation. And of course, because of state offices being closed, they're not able to renew their, business filing that would be an indicator of eligibility, for example. So because they're not able to do that, they might not be eligible. So there's just a lot of hoops that they got to jump through. And so the work that we do as a nonprofit organization and helping the community navigate through and just getting resources has the demand for our services has tripled. Mm-hmm. And so I think that we're starting to kind of see a level of calmness within the community, but I know that a lot of the businesses will be out of business. It's just really a really tough time. And then you also have, unemployment that we come into end, and then people not having meaningful employment, readily available to them. So there's just a lot of issues, not only with businesses, but also with, individual families as well.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned it's going to be a long road ahead, and we don't want to forget that people are still dealing with the after effects of a lot of things that have happened this year, and we're still in the middle of the pandemic. And while there are so many challenges, we do want to ask you both the question that we've been asking folks tonight, which is, regardless of what happens moving forward, what are your hopes for your communities and for Minnesotans at large? You can both answer.
So for me, this being election night, I think that we have an opportunity. It's going to be a long road, like Bao mentioned, but we have seen that in the Minnesota House, we have had many proposals to provide the resources and the aid to all these communities, the immigrant, the Black, and the indigenous communities, business community to come back and be revitalized. But we have seen that because of the Republican-controlled Senate that we cannot get that through. And then one of the federal issue that we were hearing when we were out there door knocking, talking to people, especially Hmong community members, they were saying that we're not getting the help that we need from the federal government. And the truth is that the state of Minnesota, the governor of the state, requested a state of emergency declaration from the President Trump administration, but that was denied. And so we I think that this is an election that really show what are we going to do to provide for these communities going forward. And so I'm really excited that despite the results that we're going to have tonight, we're going to continue to fight to really help these communities to build back better and really see what can we do to.
Thank you both so much. I think we're just out of time. We've got to cut back into MPR News, but I know you'll both continue to do great work. Thank you so much.
In Minnesota, and you're listening to Election Night 2020 here on MPR News. I'm Tom Cran. Mike Mulcahy's here, and we are beginning to get more results here in Minnesota. So, Mike, why don't you run through what we know right now?
Well, here's a couple things we know for sure, Tom. We know that 2 DFL members of Congress have been reelected to their second terms tonight. Ilhan Omar in the 5th District, the Minneapolis area, she won easily, 65% of the vote. And Dean Phillips in the Minneapolis suburbs, he won as well with 56% of the votes. He defeated his Republican opponent, Kendall Qualls. We're still waiting for more results in other races. It's too soon to tell much about anything right now.
Yeah. We
can say that with the votes in that we know of, about 22% of the precincts reporting Joe Biden has a lead over Donald Trump right now, 61% to 37%. Tina Smith, the DFL incumbent U.S. Senator, has a lead over Republican Jason Lewis, 56% to 36%. I'm looking at some of these other congressional races around the state. We're still waiting for more numbers, basically, there, Tom. So
right.
A little too soon yet, but the numbers are coming in, so we'll see where we are as the evening goes on.
It is election night, and it wouldn't be election night here on MPR News without our good friends Todd Rapp and Maureen Shaver, because it is COVID-19 and the pandemic. They can't be in the studio with Mike, and I aren't even in the same studio. But Todd Rapp joins us now, I understand, and you can hear us loud and clear from where you are, Todd.
I am deep in the middle of one of the most competitive legislative races in the metro area right now.
Okay.
Woodbury, Minnesota.
Woodbury, Minnesota, exactly. That is one on our list to watch. But I want to know tonight, Todd, in Woodbury, what are you looking at and looking for that'll tell the tale tonight?
Well, I'm watching in the statewide races how close Tina Smith is running to Joe Biden. In some of the early returns, there's been a pretty substantial drop-off from the Biden vote caused by what appears to be the 2 marijuana party candidates on the ballot. Now, it looks like, as I've compared her races in certain counties, she's still running pretty close to where she was 2 years ago, but certainly it demonstrates that the marijuana party candidates can have some impact on these elections. I'm also going to be watching Congressional District 1 and Congressional District 7 very closely, 2 of the top 10 races in the country, pretty important ones for the size of control of Congress, and to see if this gradual transformation of greater Minnesota towards Republican control continues.
All right. And those races, either of those right now, Todd, not a lot of numbers in, right?
No, we won't see some numbers on those, at least a lot of numbers, for another hour or two, that's for sure. We tend to see more results in the metro area from Hennepin and Anoka County really early on, but gradually some of the rural results are going to be coming in.
Yeah.
Todd, what do you think about the presidential race in Minnesota so far? What do you think? Democrats seemed a little confident going in. Do you think they have reason to be confident?
Well, so far we're seeing mostly metro results, and I think they should be pretty happy with what they're seeing there. That Biden is certainly running comfortably ahead there, and at a pace similar to what Governor Walz did, for example, 2 years ago. I think the interesting part's going to be as we start getting more and more returns from rural Minnesota, and particularly what we see coming in from the Iron Range and other parts of northern Minnesota. How significant the move towards Trump has happened in the last 4 years.
All right, Todd Rapp, thanks so much for your perspective, the Democratic or DFL perspective, and we'll check in with Maureen. We'll get her all connected as well and talk to her throughout the evening as we continue to bring you live coverage of Election Night 2020 here on MPR News. And a reminder, full coverage and even a live webcast going on as well on mprnews.org. There you'll have results, and you can watch that live webcast with my colleague Nina Moyni about some issues and voters around the state.
Thanks to Tom Cran. I wish I had his booming voice, but you guys are stuck with me for the night. Welcome back. We're doing live local election coverage, as Tom Cran mentioned, with Sahan Journal and MPR News. And we're lucky to be joined now by two more guests. It's University of Minnesota political science professor Michael Minta and Harry Colbert, who's editor of North News. So they'll pop up there. Hello, gentlemen. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. We really appreciate you both being here. Minnesota's been through a lot this year. We have been at the center of national, international attention since the killing of George Floyd. And we have this pandemic going on, and these situations have really highlighted some ongoing racial disparities and inequities that we know exist in our state. I wondered, Professor Minta, we know that the number of Black Americans who voted actually dropped from 2012 to 2016. How do you think things are going to shake out this year, and what do you think will contribute to that voter turnout?
Yeah, I think in terms of absolute numbers, it went down, but in terms of like overall percentage, a few percentage points, but still relatively high in the high 60s nationally. But where it did drop, those few percentage points, like in Wisconsin and Michigan, made a difference, right, in terms of states that usually go for Democrats and they ended up losing. I think this year, a lot of civil rights groups, the party has made a concerted effort to make sure that Blacks turn out and that won't be the reason why they lose a close election, say in Wisconsin, Michigan. So that's the biggest change.
Mm-hmm.
And Harry, I understand that you were at the polling stations today. What have you seen?
Yeah, we were at several polling stations throughout North Minneapolis, and we saw steady turnout throughout, large turnout early in the morning, talked to some election officials, and what they were saying is basically in many of the precincts, upwards of 49% of the voters had already cast ballots prior to today. But there was steady turnout throughout the day at many of the locations, whether it was Lucy Laney School, North Commons, North Community High School, or any of the other locations that we were talking to voters.
And I know that there have been some reports of fear and of intimidation at the polling stations.
Yeah.
Have you spoken with voters, and what were they saying?
The voters said that really didn't play a lot into their decisions. They weren't deterred at all. They said they were resilient. And one of the things that you did notice at all the locations in North Minneapolis, you had volunteers who were there as kind of, I don't want to use the word security, but at the same time, they were there to kind of offer some sense of help if there was anyone coming to try to dissuade voters from exercising their constitutional rights. And that was at every polling place. You'd see about between 2 and 4 of those individuals.
Yeah, and this could be for both of you, but the killing of George Floyd, of course, brought Minnesota into the international spotlight, and also highlighted some significant disparities in this state. How do you find this has impacted the turnout of Black voters in this state? And also, are more black, voters, or candidates running for offices because of what has happened over the summer?
Well, I think one thing that we're seeing that we need to watch in terms of younger people, right? I think that the George Floyd killing definitely motivated a lot of young people. You saw that in terms of the protest uprisings, the Black Lives Matter movement. So I know there's a vigorous effort by many groups, grassroots movements, and as well as traditional civil rights groups to get more young people engaged. We'll see if that's actually reflected in terms of the turnout. There are definitely more candidates running nationwide, state and local races, black candidates that have been successful running kind of on the Black Lives Matter platform for police reform, economic justice, getting rid of systemic inequality. So I think, it still remains to be seen. Here in Minnesota, the results were so early, and then looking at the exit polling, we don't have that data, but we'll see if it really did make a difference in terms of getting younger people out more involved. And this is in contrast to, say, in 2016.
And what I was seeing at the polls were you were seeing a lot of young people, and this is what is different than maybe in years past when you see a younger, the 18, 19, 20-year-old voter. A lot of times they'd be accompanied by their parents, kind of that ritual of going to the polls together for the first time. What I was seeing were several of these young voters voting with their friends and voting or by themselves, and so they were making a conscious effort to get out there and be a part of the process without necessarily being accompanied by someone else of a different generation that was nudging them on. One thing that should be noted in kind of once we get to the post-mortem phase of the election, in 2018, Representative Omar carried the fifth with 78%, almost 78% of the vote. When we look at it tonight, that number's down to 64%. Of course, a big win for her, but still at that same time, you're looking at a Republican candidate in the fifth getting close to 100,000 votes. And so that might lead into trying to figure out where the numbers will shake out for the presidential race as well. So that was kind of a shocker.
Could I add on to that?
Oh, of course, please.
No, I just wanted to add on to Ilhan Omar, even though it's a very safe Democratic district. We have to go way back to see if a Republican even won. That Republican, Lacey Johnson, got a massive amount of campaign money from within the state and outside of the state. So I think it was a concerted effort to really try to not necessarily win the district for the Republicans, but to keep the margins down. And from the early reporting, it seems like that has been somewhat successful.
Exactly.
And Harry, I just wanted to just switch gears a little bit and focus in on North Minneapolis, since you're with North News. It's been a challenging summer for all of Minneapolis. Shootings have been on the rise, not just in North Minneapolis. Certain types of crime have been on the rise. And I don't want to conflate either the killing of George Floyd and make it seem like that is the same situation as the arson and the rioting that happened, because that wasn't everybody that we know was part of the largely peaceful protests that occurred. But I do know that because of some of the arson and the looting, a lot of resources have been stripped from the community. Grocery stores were shuttered for weeks at a time. How do you feel like that has impacted potential voters? And then tack on to that the pandemic.
Well, when you look at the activity that occurred right after the killing of George Floyd, many North Minneapolis residents will tell you that they don't believe that the activity was solely the efforts of people who were either in any way associated with what would be considered a Black Lives Matter movement or things of that nature, because what was being targeted were grocery stores, pharmacies, essential services within the community, and many people in North Minneapolis will tell you those were outside forces. So we don't. To your point, you don't want to conflate that, because many people here don't believe that this was from within. With that being said, Safety is paramount, is one of the concerns here for residents of North Minneapolis. You want to feel safe from the police, and you also want to feel safe from members of the community. So that certainly is playing a role in what's happening now in terms of the political landscape. Absolutely.
And Professor, I just wondered if you, in your studies over the years, have there been other elections where there has been such a concern around security? I don't know that anything panned out that was that concerning today. I've not heard, and it seems like our public officials and state officials are saying things have run smoothly. But that seemed out of the norm, that a lot of people felt scared to go vote, it seemed like.
Well, I think for African Americans, that's always an issue of voter intimidation and ideas of, I think, the president having armed people coming to monitor the polls. I mean, similar to what was happening in the 60s in Mississippi and Alabama. But I think it's just part of an effort really for the president to raise concerns about alleged fraud. But the one thing that's very interesting, and you don't usually see this in the United States, where you have a U.S. president basically saying that if he doesn't win the election, then it's not going to be a legitimate election, and that there should be civil unrest in the streets. That's stuff that you usually see kind of like in Latin America and maybe in some sub-Saharan African countries. So it is very unusual to see an American president make those type of statements and have people feel, like you said, uncomfortable to actually go out to vote. And even some people saying they may have to leave because they're fearful whatever happens in this election, that their lives might be at risk. So this is very unusual for the U.S.
But it sounds like a lot of people early voted, and that there was record turnout despite the pandemic. And I just wonder too, the effects of the pandemic have been so overarching in everybody's lives, but how do you feel like Black voters in particular have been impacted?
Well, all the numbers show that Blacks have been disproportionately affected by the pandemic in terms of getting it at a higher rate, more likely to die of it, really exacerbating many of the health inequities that we have in this country already. And then the biggest thing is many Blacks work in these frontline jobs where they can't stay at home and do a Zoom call or a Google Meets call, and they have to go in and work. And so that's one of the reasons why I think Blacks as well as Latinos are concerned. And that's why you see it reflected in the polling that it is a number one issue, or maybe not the number one issue, but a top 3 issue in terms of the president's handling of the coronavirus. You see it differently if you're a Republican.
Harry, do you have anything to add on the COVID take there?
Well, once again, when I was talking to voters, they were saying that the voters today were saying that wasn't an issue for them. They didn't feel in any way that their safety was in jeopardy, whether it be from COVID or from outside agitators. The word of the day was kind of vigilance. People wanted to be very vigilant in protecting their right to vote.
Okay.
And Harry, I just wanted to, ask. I know that there have been conversations around disbanding the police. That means different things for different people. But with the folks that you spoke with, has this played a role in their decision on how they vote?
No, the number one issue from the people that I talk to, and this is regardless of ethnicity today, the number one issue that came out, and it also ran the gamut in terms of generation, was healthcare. And they said that was overriding, including the pandemic, not just because of the pandemic. So that obviously equity was something that people were talking about, and making sure that we have a safe society from, once again, police and the community. But that wasn't the number one thing that I heard from the voters in North Minneapolis, and I talked to a majority of them who were Black.
So we just have a couple minutes left. Thank you both again so much with your time. We've talked a lot about some of the challenges that exist right now, but I do want to ask just what your hopes or your ideas for the future are tomorrow when we all wake up or whenever we know the results of this election, what are some of your hopes?
To not have this anxious feeling, for one. There's a lot of anxiety in the community, and I think a lot of people are looking forward to a change, and that's something that keeps being an overriding theme is wanting change. So that's kind of where I am right now with it. There's a lot of angst in the community.
Professor?
I'm just hoping that that all our national leaders, local leaders, state leaders will just keep reiterating that this could take some time to actually find out the true winner of many of these races because of the pandemic and a lot of these mail-in ballots and absentee ballots, and just to keep it calm, keep people, manage expectations, and that we'll accept the results of a fair and free election. So I think it takes some patience this time because we're in an unprecedented time.
I would like to add,
much. Of course.
I did want to add one thing, and this is not necessarily from a local perspective, but from a local and a national perspective. Democrats have work to do when it comes to the black male voter. You're going to see this across the board in state after state. The numbers are not going to be what they were hoping for. I'm not saying that Joe Biden will lose, but what I am saying is Donald Trump somehow was able to find a message that resonated with black voters, and it's from feeling.
Oh, I think we might have lost. I'm so sorry. We'll look back into the points that he was making and try to provide an update a little later on. But for now, we'll be back in just a few minutes.
Michael Moore, the Legal Marijuana Now candidate, had 9%. Now, as for the big race, president, we're still waiting for more votes to come in. We've got about 24% of precincts reporting. Joe Biden has a lead 60% to 38%. Donald Trump. That's in Minnesota, mind you.
Right.
In the U.S. Senate race, again, 24% of the precincts in. Tina Smith has 55%. She's the incumbent Democrat. Republican challenger Jason Lewis has 37%. So we're keeping an eye on those. Too early to call those. We're keeping an eye on the other congressional races around the state, and we're keeping an eye on the control of the state legislature.
All right, the first called race, a major one of the night, was in that 5th congressional district. Ilhan Omar has won a second term in Congress, and not long ago, she spoke to supporters, it being election night 2020, no big gathering, but she did this on Facebook. And let's hear some of what she had to say.
The people who are telling you that we are somehow radical for wanting to feed our children, house our families, and make sure we have a livable planet are not the ones who are putting America first. The real America First agenda is one that puts people first. We are building a movement that sees my oppression as inherently tied to your oppression and sees a world where all workers can be uplifted together. Today's vote, the results of this election, is not the end, it is just the beginning. Thank you. Thank you to Minnesota's 5th for honoring me with their votes. I am so excited to get to work alongside you.
That is Representative Ilhan Omar, who has won a second term in Congress representing Minnesota's 5th congressional district tonight, speaking not all that long ago to supporters. Again, the AP has called that race. It looks like almost all votes are in on that one. She has 65% of the vote. The Republican challenger Lacey Johnson with 26%. So let's bring in now a political science professor from the University of Minnesota, Michael Minta. And see what he is making of tonight so far. So, Michael Minta, thanks for joining us.
Oh, thank you for having me.
You're welcome. And first, I just want to get your reaction to where we've been so far tonight. It seems like so many polls were promising a big night for Joe Biden, and it's much tighter than it's turning out to be much tighter than those polls predicted, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was wishful thinking. I mean, just looking at the polls for many of these southern states like Georgia, North Carolina, Florida, I think Biden had a shot, but that was dashed. I think Democrats are still mostly putting their stock in, say, like these Midwestern states like Minnesota, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin. So I think that's what they're really putting the focus on, and that's why the vice president and the president's been here so many times.
Now, Barack Obama won 2 terms with a very broad, very diverse coalition of voters, and his vice president, Joe Biden, running tonight, running this cycle, but certainly we're seeing results tonight that don't quite measure up to that. Do you think he was able to do that, to get that coalition that Obama enjoyed?
Well, I think it still remains to be seen. I mean, this is very unusual times with the coronavirus, the inability of candidates to go out and really campaign. I mean, the Democrats not basically doing the virtual campaigning and only recently started going out and trying to reach out to voters. But in terms of building up that diversity, I think it still remains to be seen. I mean, much is being made about Florida and the Latino vote, but, Cuban Americans are very different and tend to trend and vote more Republican than, say,
All right, we're back with our last segment. I hate to cut into what Professor Minto was talking about, but we did just speak with him this segment prior, so it was good to hear from him there again. For our last segment, we want to check in with some of our communities across some different regions of our state. And we have 2 more wonderful guests with us tonight. Joe Fredericks, who's news editor at WTIP North Shore Community Radio. And we have Hobaugh, a city council candidate tonight from Austin. Thanks to you both for being here. We really appreciate it. I had a question for both of you. For folks that aren't from your area, how does your area typically lean? How do people typically vote? And are you feeling like there are going to be any significant changes? Maybe you could start, Joe.
Sure. Well, typically Cook County, here where Grand Marais is, where WTIP, the radio station where I work, is located, typically it goes Democrat. In 2012, for example, it went for Obama by 23 points, and in 2016 for Hillary Clinton, I think by 22. So typically is a Democratic county, Cook County. Doesn't represent, though, the 8th congressional district as a whole has changed here in recent years. It went for Obama by I think 5.5% and then changed to Trump in 2016 by 15 points. So there's been a change in the 8th congressional district, which is a massive district here in northern Minnesota. But Cook County, where the radio station is located, Grand Marais and so forth, Democratic.
Hobaugh? Oh, I can't quite hear you. I'm not sure if I'm the only one. Are you muted?
Yes, I was
Okay.
muted.
That's
I
okay.
muted-
Please go ahead.
Yeah, I would say most area of southern east here, especially Austin in Moore County. I would say the voters here is kind of diverse. I would say most of the voters, they're Republican and others are Democrat and Republican. But for the last few years, the Senate and the state representative has been Democrat, which is Gene Pappy and Dennis Park. So we don't know how the changes will shift this year.
Yeah, Obala, I mean, I wanted to thank you for joining us, first of all, and I wanted to speak with you about the immigrant communities in Austin. A lot of times when we hear of immigrants, we're only thinking about the Twin Cities area, not really greater Minnesota. So tell us a little bit more about these communities. Where are they coming from? What kind of work are they doing? And also, are there immigrants who are running for offices aside from you? Of course, you're running for a city council seat in Austin. How about other folks? Do we have people who are already serving as elected officials in the area?
First of all, I want to say thank you, Ibrahim, and also the MPR for hosting this and helping me to be part of this presentation today. Austin area, most of the immigrants that been to Austin, most of them come from Ethiopia, South Sudan, Burmese, Puerto Rico, Guatemala, and and some other part of West Africa, which is Benin, Togo, uh, um, Benin, Togo. Those are the most area, and also Mexico here in our border. So, and most of the immigrants, those come in Austin specific, they're attracted by because of the jobs that Austin offer here, especially by Ormel and QPP and other local business, so such as Mayo. So those are the reason why immigrant move to Austin is to get job at those food process industry.
Yeah, and of course, as I said earlier on, you are running for an office, and I was interested in learning a little bit about why you get into politics, especially in Austin. Is it because people who, of immigrant background kind of feel left out in when it comes to representation in local offices?
Well, I think that wasn't mainly the case when I decided to run for office in Austin here. I moved to Austin, Minnesota in 2015, and since then I've become so involved in the community, and I get the support from everyone, from the mayor, from the city council, and other commissioner. So I become just an active citizen in the community, and I got involved mainly working in statewide for a student. But since I'm done with the school now, I see like there are a lot of need to do representation for young generation. So to bring a new voice to the city council, and I will say I get encouraged by the current city council and also by the mayor, and I'm like, okay, I think maybe this is the time to try this. So and that's why I decided to run.
And what was it like? I mean, to run for an office when you are probably the first and the only right now Black immigrant running for office in Austin. What was your experience like?
Yeah, it's quite interesting because Austin was established in 1868, and since then we have never seen any person of color who have been elected in the office all these years, and most of the immigrants who live here, they have not contested for any office. Austin, for almost it been only white, and the last 30 years, Austin has substantially changed with immigrant moving in. And for me, when I first decided to announce myself, I was kind of nervous because I see no one look like me, but I'm like, what will the community say? Even if the current leader are encouraging me to jump in and try my best, what will the community say? And then that nervous went away after I announced myself, and I'm like, it's all about the work. America is a great country whereby if you come with a big dream, you can make your dream to come true. And then when I announced myself, that nervousness went away. And right now I'm just rolling it, and I'm just waiting for the result, whatever it comes.
Yeah, and I know, Obala, that you ran, I think you announced that you were running a couple of days or a couple of months after you became a citizen. Can you just talk a little bit about your journey from a refugee camp to becoming a citizen and now to running for an office in Austin?
Yeah, I was originally born in Ethiopia. I grew up in Ethiopia until the age 10. But in 2003, December 13, when genocide happened in my homeland in Gambela, my family and we fled the country and ran to Kenya. So the last 10 years we've been living in a refugee camp whereby the hope only is to come to America to get a better life. And so my journey, all my life I've been running, and in 2013 we finally made it to the promised land, which is the America. And then last year, December 17, I officially become a U.S. citizen. And through that, I already consider myself before as a U.S. citizen before I even become a citizen, because I've been involved, I've been helping out with everything. But when I get that certificate, I'm like, finally, I can call myself I'm a proud American citizen, and I can do anything to make this country thrive and be welcoming in this great nation. So, and now I jump my name in the city council race for the first time, and it's been amazing so far.
Wonderful. Congratulations on your journey. Joe, I wondered if I could talk with you about what types of national attention your area's received in terms of presidential candidates, a hot congressional race, perhaps. What's it looking like there? What's it look like this election cycle?
Sure. Well, in Grand Marais, it's a small town here, of course. Anybody that's been to Grand Marais or the North Shore, that we don't get presidential candidates that come and campaign here in town, but they both have been here, Biden and Trump, to northern Minnesota a number of times in Duluth and over on the Iron Range and so forth, but not particularly here in our community or in Cook County. But some of the issues certainly of relevance to us, our backyard, is the Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness and that issue around Twin Metals and proposed copper nickel mines in northern Minnesota have been, hot button issues for certainly both candidates on a national scale and drawn a lot of national attention. So even though it's not necessarily, here or proposed here, that it's more on the Ely side, it's still of great significance to us and our listeners here at WTIP and so forth. So that's one aspect of it, that, the environment is such a key resource in some of the issues here for northern Minnesota, and a lot of that having to do with mining and the logging and just industry like that that does play on a national level, which is a local issue for us here, or certainly at the very least regional. And when it trickles down from a national level to maybe more state politics, tonight we're following very closely here at WTIP the District 3 race in the state Senate, Tom Bach. And he's being challenged this year by Chris Hogan, another resident here from near the North Shore. And then also District 3A House seat for Minnesota is Rob Eklund, and he's being challenged by Thomas Mannanen, who's another younger guy for the GOP. Thomas Mannanen, we've interviewed all these candidates, and there's a lot of interest around those issues, mining and timber and so forth, that national issue, very much plays out in our state politics as well. And oddly enough, though, not as much in some of the local races, things like county commissioner or the mayor or city council. Those issues don't necessarily get mentioned at all by candidates, even on our forums that we host on the radio station. Some of those issues, we're get a little more hyper local, and things like housing and issues like that, as opposed to the overall Twin Metals or something wasn't discussed by any of the candidates this time around.
Well, I think you raise an interesting point about the importance of our local, state, and federal governments and the different issues and the different ways that our different levels of government contribute to our everyday lives. I wondered, too, how voting was looking in your area today, because we saw some long lines in the Twin Cities on some of the early voting days, 2-3 hour lines at times. What does it look like in your area, or what did it look like?
Well, we do absentee or vote by mail for most Cook County residents traditionally, not related to the pandemic or requesting those as absentee ballots for Cook County outside of Grand Marais, I should say. So traditionally we do mail-in ballots. In Grand Marais, though, a record number of where people go to the polls on election day, a record number of absentee ballots requested this year. Our auditor told us there's approximately 975 registered voters in Grand Marais, that 630, I believe, approximately requested absentee ballots, and of those, 90% had been returned by 5 o'clock yesterday. So a massive turnout. Minnesota always takes a great amount of pride in our high voter turnout, and Cook County is always near or at the top of the list for counties as far as a percentage of voters and people that vote. So a huge turnout once again. I think it was at 84% already had returned their ballots this year and voted, registered voters. So high turnout in Cook County, but not at the polls per se. A lot of absentee ballots or vote by mail, as I said. But yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I know that we have a few minutes, and Obala, I wanted to bring you in here. What was it like to run for an office during the pandemic? Were you able to do the campaigning in the normal way that people did when we weren't in this, or how did you think? How did you change things around?
I think campaign during pandemic has really become a big challenge for especially for new elect office, those who are starting for the first time. For me personally, it's kind of something really difficult because I'm used to watching candidate making crowd and going to people, talking to them, door knocking. But during this pandemic was really difficult because the voters, they're afraid of themselves so that they don't get the virus. And me myself, I have to be concerned too about the voters. So the only thing that play a big role throughout my campaign is social media, is using Facebook as the only tool to reach out, and also some texting with some friends. When Throughout when the campaign get closer, I did some door knocking, delivering some flyers and do the yard sign. I think that was the biggest thing we have done. But I did not have the opportunity at all to talk to voters at the same time and make a big speech while they're listening to me. So everything was throughout the social media.
That's interesting, and takes a lot of resourcefulness, I'm sure, to run a campaign like that. We just have a couple minutes left, but I did want to end by asking both of you, looking to the future, what are your hopes for the regions of the state that you're in? Joe?
My hopes for the region that I'm in. Well, we've seen, some of the divisiveness trickle into our local politics. We had some yard signs being stolen and so forth over the summer, and some contentiousness. But, I think there's also been a lot of attention focused on our mayoral race. I know that MPR has done a story about J. Earl Smith DeCoo when he was elected in the young city council that we have here, and that there's a tight race for mayor tonight that we're following very closely. And there's people coming together on that, not expressed in many races across the country, where whoever wins, we're in good shape. Both candidates have expressed that. And it's a remarkable story that got a lot of attention across the state. And that we move forward here. It's a small community here in Cook County and Grand Marais, and that no matter who wins any of the races tonight, that we step forward, regardless of what happens with the presidential election or some of these state offices that I mentioned, that, Cook County and what we do at the radio station here at WTIP is really about community, and that we can build a strong foundation no matter who wins tonight. And I think that all the candidates would agree with that sentiment.
Wonderful. What about there in Austin, Hobaugh?
Yeah, I think here in Austin, me personally, I tell the voters a few days ago, no matter what the outcome of this election, we have to move forward as a country, as one country, because this country has been found on democracy. Like me personally, my civic engagement will not end here. Either the victory come my way tonight or tomorrow, I will still continue to work with my opponent if I will not be the elect city council. My work will still continue. I will still join the city council meeting. I will still going around to the community. But one thing I want to say about my running for office here, this is me myself to make it this far. This is a victory for me already, because when I see some of my friends back in Refuge and see my work, like Hobaugh, who just been in America for 7 years, and now I am at this level, they feel so proud, and they holding to that American dream, that there is still hope that we will go to America and one day I will be like Hobaugh. I feel so happy to be where I am, serving as a student leader statewide to represent the 180,000 community college in Minnesota. That's give me a huge experience, and the governor recently appointed me at Board of Trustee. I think I have done a lot, and no matter what the outcome will come today, I think this is something that I'm so proud for, and my daughter,
Thank
this
you
is something
so
I will
much.
tell her. Yeah.
Thank you very
So-
much. We do have to go in just a couple of minutes, but we really appreciate both of you for coming on tonight, and thank you for sharing your stories of your parts of your state. And we just want to make sure that everybody in our state feels like they're included in our coverage at Sahan Journal and at MPR News. So we really appreciate you both taking the time tonight. Thank you.
My pleasure.
And,
Thank you so much for having us.
Sure. Well, that's going to do it for us. This really flew by, Ibrahim, and it was so nice to check in with Minnesotans across the state. And thank you so much for doing this with me tonight.
No, it's an honor to really work with NPR and with you. And bring our people together tonight so that they can share their stories. So.
Yeah, and we're going to have continued coverage on Sahan Journal and MPR News 91.1 and also online on both of our news organizations' websites. But we wanted to leave tonight on the most hopeful note we can, which is a bunch of kids saying what they would do if they became president. So we'll leave it at that. Thank you so much. And again, no matter what happens tonight, take care of yourselves.
Help the environment, buy more land for more trees, because if we didn't have trees, then there wouldn't be a way to breathe.
I would give more housing to the homeless and more food to them, and shutting a lot of stuff down. Trampoline park so I can go there myself.
I would call other presidents that have been there in the past, and I would ask them what they would do.
I would see if I could give more money to the medicals so they can solve more cases and give more treatments.
If I was the president of the United States, instead of sending people off to have wars, I would have two people who run the entire country just fight square on, and then whoever wins would win whatever they're arguing about.
Put a trampoline in there. I would probably put a bunch of fake spider webs and stuff.
I would plant more trees and protect the earth and its flora and fauna. And one of the specific examples would be something like the Amazon, because it's being chopped down from deforestation and cattle ranching.